who will be leading today's session on rewiring thoughts and introduction to cognitive behavioral therapy. Ms. Riddhi holds a master's degree in clinical psychology from Christ University, Bangalore. She brings with her diverse clinical experience, including providing therapy under supervision, working closely with children with special needs, and facilitating group therapy sessions for individuals with substance dependency. Her research interests focus on contemporary mental health concerns. She has presented her work on existential anxiety and social media usage, as well as on the work life balance of working mothers at reputed psychology conferences. Beyond her clinical and research contribution, Ms. Riddhi is deeply committed to psychoeducation, mentoring, and community initiatives that support children and families. With certifications from esteemed institutions such as Harvard Medical School and Brown University, she brings a thoughtful blend of academic insight and practical experience to her work. We are truly delighted to have her with us today, and we look forward to an insightful and enriching session. Before we move ahead with the session, I would request all the participants to kindly mute yourself while we are in the session. And in case if you all have any doubts, I would request you all to put your doubts in the chat box, which we will be dealing it at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Arva ma'am. I'm really glad to have all of you here with me today. So, since the past 6 years, I've been learning about psychology, and that's one of the most important thing that we learn is the power of our mind and how our thoughts shape the way we feel and how we feel shape the way we live, right? So that's today exactly that's what we are going to approach. We're going to explore one of the most evidence-based and practical approaches in the field of mental health, which is the cognitive behavioral therapy. And CBT is not just about thinking positive or forcing yourself to feel better. It's about learning how your mind works, being aware of your patterns, and discovering some simple coping skills that can help you maintain your emotional well-being. So let us understand what exactly is cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is a practical, structured approach that helps people understand how their thoughts, emotions, and behavior influence each other and teaches simple skills to engage in unhelpful pattern. It was developed in the 1960s by psychiatrist Aaron T. Beck, who introduced this as an effective evidence-based method for improving emotional well-being. So it's one of the areas that CBT focuses on, most importantly, is your thoughts, emotions, and behavior. So just a brief history about how it came to be is that in the early age where they were developing the field of psychology as a science, there was some group of scientists called the fundamental behaviorists who said that only observable behavior can be studied and can be called scientific. So they rejected any thing which could not be measured, such as your thoughts and emotions. At the same time, there was another group of people who were the cognitive behaviorists. They hypothesized that only your thoughts and your motives and your reaction to things that could help you understand about what is happening in the field, or what is happening inside your psyche. And eventually, after a lot of research, a lot of progress in the field, we realized that it's not a one-on-one thing. It's like both of these things kind of influence each other, they interact with each other, and that's how eventually cognitive behavioral therapy became a modality on its own, right? So what exactly do these terms mean? Cognition refers to the mental processes which is involved in gaining knowledge, comprehension, including thinking, knowing, remembering, judging, and problem solving. So basically, our mental processes that we use daily. And behavior, particularly in psychology, refers to the observable, measurable, and often automatic response of an individual or organism to internal or external stimuli. So behavior could be a result of something you're feeling internally, that maybe I'm not feeling as good today, so I'll go out for a walk. That would be a behavior. At the same time, it could be also because of something externally happening. So if the room is very cold for a moment, I'll go and seek a jacket. That could be a behavior. So to elucidate this concept a bit better, I have given an example where, for example, if a student comes up to you and he's like, I have a maths exam coming up. I'm really bad at maths and I'm definitely going to fail. And as a result of this thought, what he ends up doing is he avoids studying, because what's the point if I know that I'm going to fail? Why should I even study? Why don't I just play games? So here, the I will fail component is the cognition bit, and the avoids studying component is the behavior bit. So CBT kind of combines these both, and there's one more element that comes into play, which I have not mentioned here, which is the emotion aspect, right? So a CBT lens would look like this, where the CBT psychologists usually say that any mental disorder or any pathology can be explained using your interactions of thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And now, if we look in the middle, there is a triangle that we see. So although like there's a external process happening where your thoughts are influencing your behavior, your feelings are influencing your behavior, thoughts are influencing your emotions are influencing your behavior, there's one more thing that ends up happening is that there's a set of core beliefs which also get reinforced, or they're kind of confirmed in a way. So, what are core beliefs exactly is they are some of the beliefs that we form in our early childhood or due to some adverse experience, usually as a result of some major learning. And these beliefs kind of stick with us throughout the life, right? So, these core beliefs, all of us might have some or the other core belief. It could look like that, I have to be the perfect daughter, I have to be a perfect student, I should do this, I should do that. These could be like a set of core beliefs. And the core beliefs that we usually have are about ourselves as a person, about others in the world, and also about the future, right? So let us take the same example that I gave and try to understand exactly what this diagram could mean. So if a student were to go to a CBT psychotherapist and be like, okay, I have an exam, I'm definitely going to fail, what the CBT therapist would help identify is that, okay, then what is the emotion that is coming out of it? So maybe the student is feeling fear, he's feeling anxious, and because of that, what he ends up doing is he avoids studying. Or if he feels like there's no point in studying because I know I'm going to fail. So in doing so, what ends up happening is there's a loop that forms, right? So if there's an exam, if I'm going to avoid studying, I'm definitely going to fail either ways because I didn't study at all. I couldn't prepare for the possibility of what could come on the paper. And now, once I have failed, what it does is it kind of reinforces your core beliefs that I'm not capable. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at maths. And others are better than me. They have a better understanding of concepts than me. And also, maybe like the world is too demanding. I don't want to get into this. So it kind of becomes like a loop where the child or a person is stuck, where they are letting the thoughts affect their emotions, which is affecting their behavior, which is also in the end affecting the core beliefs of the person, right? So just to summarize what we have done till now, CBT is a psychotherapist that combines cognitive therapy and behavioral therapy. It identifies faulty maladaptive patterns and your thinking, your emotions, and behavior which are faulty in nature, and then substitutes it with a desirable pattern. So it's very important that when you take away something, when we are removing or identifying a faulty pattern, we are also substituting it with a desirable thought pattern or a emotional response. Why? Because if you don't do that, a mind is like a vessel. If you're going to remove the thoughts away, it's not possible for us to not have a thought at all, right? So we have to make sure that we kind of reinforce with a probably like an alternative thinking pattern or a more desirable response, so that we make sure that the maladaptive patterns do not really return. Okay. Now, why is CBT so widely regarded in the field of psychology is because it has a lot of range in terms of the kind of disorders it deals with. As you can see on the list, there's a huge list I have mentioned, and some of them I could not even cover because it's a really good tool in dealing with all these aspects. Along with that, it also has a very wide range when it comes to like working with a certain population. So children can go for CBT, adolescents can opt for it, adults, older adults, couples with family, and neurodivergent individuals, individuals who may have some chronic illness, some trauma history, even substance use populations, and it's also used in group settings. So it has a very wide area in terms of the concerns that it addresses, also in terms of the population that it targets, which is why it's one of the widely used tools. Now, uh, CBT, although it's a psychological, framework, there's also some science behind it, right? So when we look at the research on CBT, we see that it has been backed up with a lot of evidence from neuroscience. So a lot of researchers using fMRIs, PET scans, EEG scans have found that with the long-term CBT therapy going on, there have been changes in the way the brain kind of understands information, forms new connections, and also the activity in the brain, right? So it kind of looked at areas such as emotional regulation, such as fear, memory, and executive functioning, and it found a lot of evidence in support of this therapeutic modality. And understandably so, because as you can see in the first point, which is it strengthens prefrontal cortex thinking. So what CBT does it again, it will, create that triad, help you understand your thought pattern. And what your prefrontal cortex is used for is rational thinking, planning, executing, and the way you even interpret a situation. So after a lot of research, it was found that people who may have anxiety or depression, for example, they might not have a very active prefrontal cortex, but they might have a very active thinking brain or amygdala response, right? Limbic system response. And why is that? Is because uh, there's a lot of emotions attached to these mental health concerns. So what CBT does is it increases the prefrontal cortex activity, and it helps people engage in more logical thinking, and it eventually helps them look at a situation and react in a way that is not exaggerated. So it helps you also regulate your emotions, so it gives thinking brain back at control. Another area of the brain which has been found to be linked with CBT administration is the amygdala, which is your brain's fear center. So, in complex conditions, when there is a lot of trauma, a lot of chronic stress, like uh, post-traumatic stress disorder, even obsessive compulsive disorder, when there have been a withstanding long-term trauma, what ends up happening is that your amygdala does not really get back to its baseline, how it's supposed to be. Amygdala is very helpful in terms of alerting us when there is a problem or when there's a fear response, and we do need a day-to-day activity. But in terms when there is such a long-standing abuse of like maybe substance or maybe trauma, it's not able to get back to its baseline where it's able to calm down. So what CBT does is then it helps reduce the amygdala activation by correcting catastrophic interpretations of stimulus and teaching safety techniques. So in terms of phobia, for example, if a person has a lot of fear of dogs and he goes out and sees a dog, he might not want to step out of the house the next time. And what CBT would do then is like it will work on kind of reducing the threat that the uh, maybe the dog gives. And that's how it kind of teaches and trains the brain to not treat it as a threat and make a very rational or a logical understanding of what the threat is. Right. Another area of the brain CBT has been linked with is your hippocampus, which is responsible for your memory and contextualizing your memory and also contextualizing fear, right? So it's often smaller in size or dysregulated in terms of in cases of trauma, depression, and chronic stress. So CBT, especially trauma focused CBT, then helps reorganize the traumatic memory, reduce the fear associated with the past events, and help like more of a prefrontal cortex thinking. So it kind of helps the client then differentiate that, okay, my past is not happening right now. It's more of a present based thing. So it kind of helps you create some safety coping mechanisms, which helps your memory in a way of distinguishing between what is the past and what is the present. And another area of the brain it's linked with is your default mode network. So default mode network is linked with your rumination, the worrying, or even self-referential thinking, where you kind of think of yourself in the context of things, right? So in illnesses such as stress, depression, obsessions, DMN is a very active area because it keeps going and keeps keeping you in that loop. So CBT helps quieten the DMN network by interrupting the negative thoughts and restructuring it to be a more alternative or positive thoughts to be reduce the loop. So it kind of helps reduce the overthinking and the self-critical loops that one might fall trapped to. And CBT is built on the principle of neuroplasticity. So whenever we think of old thinking patterns, old behaviors and emotions, it kind of works on those, targeting those, understanding those, and a lot of like restructuring helps you create new networks where you're able to think of alternative ways. You're able to think of different perspectives. And that's how it kind of creates new pathways for your brain to rely on rather than the old ones. So the old pathways start getting weakened, and the new learnings and the new outcomes is something that you try to automatically then rely on. And the last area would be the HPA axis. So it kind of helps reduce the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is helpful in creating cortisol in when your body's stressed. So again, excess of everything is not okay. So if a person who has a long standing history of abuse trauma, they're not able to reach the baseline again. So CBT helps normalize the cortisol level by reducing the perceived threat and helping come up with some coping strategy to address it. So again, along with the psychological benefit, it also has physical benefits on your health. Now, let us understand exactly what are the components which are covered in CBT. First and foremost, just as I showed you the graph of how the event goes, psychoeducation is basically teaching the clients how they are stuck in a loop or how their thoughts and behaviors are connected, helping them be more aware of the situation, because awareness is the first step. Once you understand what's exactly happening with you, that's when you can go ahead making a change, right? Another component of CBT is in restructuring your thoughts. So identifying unhelpful thoughts, replacing them with more realistic, balanced ones. So as to reduce the stress caused by it, and also behavioral activation. So this specific thing you see in depression, right? So a person who might be highly depressed, they might not want to step out, they might not want to get out of bed. So just encouraging people to especially with low mood, to engage in more of a meaningful and rewarding activities, so that doing more leads to feel making them feel better. And in cases of phobias, exposure therapy. So gradually exposing the client to face fear in a safe mode instead of avoiding it at all, right? So as to train your brain to not make it perceived as a threat all the time, and to actually go about making the change. And one of the major components of CBT is identifying core beliefs and schema. Core belief, as I previously discussed, is something which is kind of like the belief which is formed due to early experiences, as well as your schemas, which are the mental representations of the world. An example of this could be that in the case of the child who hates maths, if he does not understand the concept, he will just kind of give up and be like, okay, I don't like maths at all, so I'm not good at it, or I'm not going to be able to do it. So it kind of helps identify these mental templates that we all have formed and address that how useful are these templates to us, how much of a distress are these causing us, if any. And another component of CBT is skills training, right? So, helping you build practical skills to help with problem solving, emotional regulation, communication, and social skills. So it's a very tailored skill training according to the client's needs. And behavioral experiment is another component which I really like, where you kind of test whatever fears or beliefs you might have in real life environment and see how true are these assumptions about ourselves, right? So an example of this would be a person who has a lot of social anxiety, who might not be able to make a lot of friends. A CBT activity would be like, okay, how about you go out today and talk to two people and see how they react. And then you can make that assumptions that, okay, maybe it's not as scary to make friends, right? That would be an example of behavioral experiment. And again, homework also consists of behavioral experiment. There are other homework such as maintaining a thought record or a diary to keep track of your thoughts is important in CBT, because whatever you're practicing in the session eventually has to be, replicated in the real life situations. So that's one of the good things of CBT, is that you go beyond the session to make sure that you can speed up the process of your progress. And another area that CBT helps you with is relapse prevention, especially in cases of substances. So it helps the therapy helps client make long-term progress by identifying the triggers, early warning sign, and also equipping the client with coping mechanisms or coping plans. And in the end, it's a very collaborative goal setting kind of a therapeutic intervention. So it's important that you're going into CBT therapy with some goal sets in mind and wanting to do some work yourself. So the therapist and the client then together will set some goals and then work towards it. So it's a very structured type of a therapy in that sense. Now, I mentioned some thinking traps that we often make, or some distortions that we often make. So, what exactly are these distortions, right? So, CBT usually targets certain systematic habitual errors in thinking that cause individual to interpret experiences in a exaggerated, inaccurately, or negatively based manner. They arise automatically and often are outside of the conscious awareness, and they deeply reflect your core beliefs and schemas from through past learning, conditioning, and emotional experiences. So these distortions again are something that we all make. They're kind of habitual, they kind of happen automatically, and they are as a result of something that may you may have learned early on, and something that is a core belief to you. So again, they are outside of our conscious awareness. They might be exaggerated, they might be inaccurate, and these kind of stop us from making logical or rational decisions, and they kind of hinder the process for us. And it's quite important to understand that although these distortions are kind of they don't make sense much, illogical, or they might be errors in thinking, they are emerging out of a protective mechanism for yourself, right? It's because of something that has happened to you, something which you took as a learning, is that the core belief has come into play. The distortions have come into play. So it's quite important that we keep this in mind. So there's a long list of distortions that we all do. Bear with me. I've put up examples as well. So the first one is all or nothing thinking. So a lot of the times we may see things in extreme. As I mentioned here, if I'm not perfect, I'm a failure. If I don't win, I lose. If he's a good person, then I'm a bad person. Things like that, like extreme thinking, which kind of creates a lot of anxiety when something gray comes in, right? The world is not black and white, it's gray. So if something is not fitting in your idea of all or nothing, then it causes a lot of distress in the person. Another distortion that we often see is overgeneralization, drawing broad conclusions from a single event. So in the case of the student, it will be like, I failed the exam once, that means I'll always fail, I'll always be bad at it, which is not really true. As you can learn, as you grow, it might not be the same thing, right? So uh, keeping in mind that overgeneralization is again another distortion that we see. Another distortion that we often see is mental filter, where we only focus on the negative and ignore the positives. That, if one person, while you're going on a walk, one person does not look at you and smile, you think that, everybody hates you. Or if one person criticizes me, my entire day is ruined. So we often tend to do this as well. Like, we don't really take into account the positives, only focusing on the negatives. And another one, disqualifying the positive, rejecting positive feedback or experiences. I think this is a very Indian thing to do, in my opinion, where if somebody achieves something, they are like, okay, that they did on their own merit. But if you achieved something, it's only because, they praised me because they wanted me to be polite, something like that. And another thing that we see is mind reading, assuming you know what other people think. So if again you are in a setting and somebody does not talk to you, you think that she thinks that I'm stupid. So we are kind of doing mind reading because the other person has not told us that they don't like us, but it's our interpretation of what they think of us. Another one is fortune telling, where we predict failure or negative outcome as fact. So again, if you had maybe like one bad exam, believing that all the exams will now go badly, and it's a fact, that's how it's going to be, is one of the fortune telling distortion that we see. Another one that we often commonly see is expecting the worst case scenario. And I've heard this from a lot of clients where they think that this mechanism protects them. They think that if I expect the worst case, whatever happens then I can handle it. But what in the end this kind of does is it creates a lot of pressure on you to be perfect, a lot of pressure that the situation has to be going according to a plan. So an example of catastrophizing is, if I make one mistake, everything will collapse. Another one that we see is believing feelings to be true for facts. I feel overwhelmed, so I can't handle anything, is one example, where if you don't feel good about that situation or a stimulus, then you just believe that it's bad, right? So it's very important that we understand here that emotions can come and go in waves. So they're not often the most reliable factors in terms of information that you gain from them, right? Another distortion that we see is rigid rules about yourself and others. The should statements. I should never fail. I should be perfect. I should be like this. I should be like that. They should be like this. So often we end up projecting your own should statements onto other. Just because I'm a person who organizes a cabinet, I expect everybody to do that. They should do that. Then that causes distress when the other person may not do it, right? Another distortion that we see is labeling. So assigning negative labels to self or others. I'm a loser. I'm like this only. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at that. So labeling, putting tags, loser, winner, any sort of tags, and for that matter, creates a lot of pressure to live up to those expectations, right? And another distortion that we see is personalization, where we take responsibility for things outside the control. I think somewhere we all can relate to this, where if something does not go our way, it's like because, oh, I could not really control it. So, an example of this is if you're at a party and somebody's upset, they're upset because it must be because of me. So, taking responsibility of things outside your control is very detrimental because, again, life is very unpredictable. You can't really control everything. And another one that we see is blaming others while ignoring your own role. A classic example of this is when teenagers, if they do not have a good day, they would come home, slam the doors, and be like, I'm unhappy because of you. And not taking accountability for your own actions and how you came about to be in that emotion. Another distortion is minimization, where we downplay our achievement or strength. Again, it wasn't a big deal that I succeeded. Anybody could have succeeded in my position, but not really taking the moment to appreciate what you have done or appreciating your achievements. It creates a lot of kind of a dissonance after a while because you're not able to understand and be grateful of what you've already done and how much you've achieved. And the last one that we see is magnification, where we tend to exaggerate problems or imperfection. Like the small mistakes ruin everything. So, for example, a person who is going to a job interview, even though they might have excellent records, excellent letter of recommendations, if the tie is not ironed, they might be thinking that, this tie not being ironed is going to cost me my entire interview. So things like exaggerating the small imperfection that might be. So now that we've understood the components, the triggers, how exactly what we look at when we are in a CBT session, I want to just run through the example that I've given in order to understand what would a CBT psychologist do in order to tackle these problems. Again, this is a very simplified version. It's not always the case that it goes in this way. It takes a lot of sessions, it takes a lot of practice for it to be a stage where you can reach a point where there's a new neural rewiring. But just to understand the concept, I have made a graph. So for example, in the case of the child, there's an upcoming exam, which is the triggering situation. It's creating that immediate negative thoughts that I'm going to fail. And then the CBT psychologist would help identify, okay, what exactly is happening right here? Is it catastrophizing? Then the person would be like, okay. And then the therapist would help tackle that, okay, how can we challenge this? Instead of, thinking I'll fail, what are the alternatives? What can we think of? What is the evidence? How true is this? How many times have you failed? When have you failed with maths? How many times have you studied like this? And then we kind of help them guide into creating a much more balanced thought that, okay, maybe I can try solving five sums. And kind of that leads to the activation bit where they pick up the pen, pick up the notebook, and they actually try, practice, engage. And what that does in the end is it creates a new emotion where the threat is not as scary, where the emotion or where the situation is not as triggering or scary, right? It kind of creates a new outcome where even if the person might not have like given the exam quite well, they are at a point where they're like, okay, at least I tried, and it's okay. Like I need to work on these aspects. I can still work with it, reaching a point where they are independent and able to uh, make sense of these appraisals better. So that's how the new neural rewiring happen, and that's how CBT helps tackle the problem. Again, this is a disclaimer, very simplified slide, very simplified version. Everybody has different set of concerns and it looks quite different for everybody, but using just the concepts that we have discussed so far, this could be like an illustration of it. Now, when should we use CBT, right? Although it's a very effective tool, it's very important that we use it in certain situations. And here is what we typically look at when we use the CBT approach with any client. Firstly, the client can learn to identify thoughts. They're able to at least verbalize that, hey, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling this. They're able to do that and they're able to tell out loud. They're also able to identify the emotions that might be coming up. So any person who is not able to verbalize, any person who is maybe very young or very old, where they're not uh, aware there cognitively, then it might not benefit from CBT as an approach. Again, they are able to cognitively participate. So since CBT requires a lot of thinking, reflection, and practice, if somebody is able to concentrate, understand the instructions, and engage in the process, they will be able to benefit more from CBT. And the concerns are kind of not ambiguous. They're kind of structured in a way where there are specific concerns, anxiety, low stress, relationship issue, behavioral pattern. So something which is not vague or not ambiguous, it's kind of has some goals to it where which can be broken down and worked towards. As CBT sessions are usually very structured, like 8 to 20 sessions. So they should be able to, work it out in a way where it can be broken down to the components, right? And somebody who should use CBT is somebody who wants practical skills. They are able to put in the effort to learn new techniques, learn new coping. They are able to uh, start using these techniques in their daily life. So somebody who wants practical skills would really benefit from CBT, and somebody who would benefit from short-term work. Again, CBT focuses more on here and now, not much more about the past. Of course, we use the past to identify how the thinking pattern came to be or how the core schemas came to be, but it doesn't really focus on your identity in the past or your experiences in the past. It's much more of a present focus and a short-term work that we see, right? Again, when should we not use CBT? If the client is in a severe crisis or acute risk, if they are in a psychosis state, if they are in a manic state, if they are in a state where there's severe cognitive impairment, they might not uh, we don't use CBT. That's not the first thing that we use. The first thing here would be stabilizing the client, and then CBT can come in later. So in cases of severe and acute risk, CBT is not advised, and the client cannot engage in thinking based work. So this could be because they might be very emotionally dysregulated, or they might not be having the capacity to think. Somebody who has an intellectual disability in the moderate to severe range, they are not able to engage properly in a rational thinking pattern. Somebody who might have dementia, where they're not able to remember the past events, they're not able to remember what is the progress that they have made. So it's not something that they might be, useful to be worked out. Again, in cases of where the client has been extremely emotionally dysregulated, in cases of like mania or psychosis, the first step would be to stabilize them and then see how oriented they are, how much aware they are of the surroundings where they are, and how much are they able to engage in the thinking process. So for example, in cases of manias, you see a psychosis, CBT might not be the most advisable. And in the cases of when the client was like a deep exploratory therapy, somebody who has like early attachment trauma, somebody who has abandonment issues or abandonment wounds, relationship trauma, or complex trauma, which basically has changed their personality, changed their identity. So CBT might not be the best tool for them because again, it focuses on hearing now. So it doesn't really explore all these deep relationship issues that has changed the person's identity, shaped their perception, right? So in these cases, CBT is not the best tools. Now let us understand what are some of the techniques which are used in CBT. So I'll just be mentioning these briefly. But if anybody wants to know much more in detail, they can surely reach out. First is evidence seeking. So again, whatever the problem statement might be, for example, I will fail is the one that we used. We kind of ask them, Acha, what is the evidence for this? How many times has this happened? Or where have you seen this? Or if somebody who has maybe social anxiety, who might believe that everybody, or somebody who believes that, everybody hates me. You ask them, Acha, who said they hate you? When did that happen? So kind of validating but also kind of seeking evidence for how true is the belief, because we need to understand that most of them kind of emerge from the core experiences that one has. So it's important that we seek some evidence to get the truth of like how true is the statement to them. Another thing that happens in CBT is maintaining thought records. So usually the therapist will give like a structured worksheet to the client to write about what was the situation, what kind of thought they had, what was the emotion, then what did they end up doing. So kind of maintaining like a actual record of the thoughts and the situation kind of makes one very aware, one thing, and also kind of think of different perspectives or different behavior that one can kind of use instead of the thoughts that they initially had. Another thing that we use in CBT is Socratic questioning, which are like gentle kind of guided questions to understand like for example, it would be used to understand the meaning that the thing has for the client. So for example, a student who wants to pass. Okay, what does it mean to pass to you? Like, why is it so important? Where did that come from? So just asking them general questions, again, not as an interrogation, but to explore more and to understand what it means to them, right? And then identifying distortions. So the distortions that we just studied, just to be able to notice them, identify them, and then eventually work towards them is very important, because awareness would be the first step in working with CBT. Another thing that we look at is mindfulness, right? So a lot of phobias, a lot of stressors, a lot of anxieties, when you deal with them, obviously a lot of emotions are going to be coming up for the client. So it's very important that we are able to ground them to that moment. We are able to relax them. We are able to teach them the coping skill that in the future, if the same stressors arrive, I can do these skills or these mindfulness practices so that it doesn't create as much of a threat for me again. Again, challenging and reframing. So once the negative thought is identified, we help the client challenge it and create a more balanced and a realistic understanding of what the thought could be now. And the last, as I discussed already, is behavioral activation. So helping the client re-engage in meaningful activities step by step, starting off small so that they don't have a lot of guilt if they are not able to meet those demands. Just engaging them in meaningful activities or something that gives them a sense of reward so that they keep doing that more, and that kind of creates a new loop of change, right? Now, with any modality in therapy, there will be some pros and cons. And some of the major criticisms for cognitive behavioral therapy has been that it focuses more on like here and now. So it's useful for symptom specific change, but not about like with regards to your trauma, attachment patterns, or long-term emotional wounds or complex work, right? As the history in this much detail might not be explored in, as the focus is on taking care of the symptoms which are coming up now. So for example, if there is a sleeplessness which is happening because of something that happened a long time in the back, the focus would be on treating the sleeplessness right now in the moment without exploring much on the identity or the meaning or the personality which the person had long time in the back. So it can also feel too structured and surface level for some individuals who might need much more deeper work. It can feel rigid and manualized if not practiced correctly. So it's very important that the therapist that you go for is equipped to deal with these concerns. And it has also been criticized to place an overemphasis on cognition because uh, it doesn't really consider the environmental factors or the body-based trauma response or relational issues. Again, kind of place more of an emphasis on the cognition, which is not useful for some cases where they are not able to engage much more cognitively and they are driven by their emotions. And that does, it can often feel invalidating, right? If it's not practiced correctly, if a client comes up to you and says, you know, this has happened to me, and then you just reach you're just like, okay, but then how can we think of something else? That can feel very invalidating for some. So it's not the best approach if one is more emotionally inclined and if it's not practiced correctly. And it can be homework heavy, so maintaining thought diaries, behavioral activation outside, and a lot of the peoples might not be able to do that, and it can create a sense of guilt in them. So it does require a very active involvement and process, uh, which a lot of people might not appreciate. And since it was developed in the West, there is a Western cognitive bias that comes into play. Although it has been adapted to the Indian population as well, since it was developed in the West, it might not be equipped to handle all sort of cultural nuance. It might not emphasize spirituality or community as we appreciate in here. So it's very important again that the therapist that you look for is equipped to kind of use it in an Indian context or specific to you, right? So it's often said that the West kind of values the logical thinkings and uh, rational thinking patterns, but in the East, we are much more emotionally driven. We are all a community. We all have nuanced relations with each other. And another criticism is that it has a very symptom focused approach. So again, it does not really address your existential concerns. It does not really as much discover the meaning making or the personality factors. So it's just targeting the symptoms that is currently causing the distress. And again, I will keep repeating this 10 times if it needs to be, but therapist skills matter greatly. So it's very important that you're able to formulate whatever is happening with the client correctly. You're able to understand all the cognitive models. You're able to tailor the techniques to the client. You're able to be culturally sensitive. So it's important that one is equipped and one is trained. Because if you're not, then what ends up happening is it can become quite mechanical, it can be quite rigid, it can be quite invalidating for some. So it's very important that, like, if you're practicing, then you do have some training or some license to back yourself with it. Yes, so that's all. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you'll find the strength. Yeah, I'm open to taking questions.
I would request all the participants if you can kindly put your questions on the chat box and we will take from there one by one. You can also unmute yourself and ask questions. If not, you can put your questions on the chat box.
Hello, ma'am. I have a doubt. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. There. I mean, alterations of like CBT developing, right? I mean, just came across a paper on religious CBT, which
Mm-hmm.
integrates the concepts of religion into it. Yeah. Have
Okay.
you come across such modalities of CBT, ma'am?
I personally have not
Mm-hmm.
read about it. I've read about like trauma focused, I've read about uh like queer supportive, but I've not read about religious one. Did you have anything specific in mind about that?
Yes, ma'am. I was wondering, like, when we integrate such concepts, do you think like will we be able to overcome the Western bias?
Overcome the?
Western bias.
It depends on, like, again, I'm not aware about the religious CBT, but it depends on how the modality then the what does it target in this instant. And I would invite anybody else who has a perspective on this, since yeah.
Okay, just to answer that question, Trishul, I think CBT per se does not include religion in any form. It's very neutral and it's related to your thoughts. However, religious content can be part of the thoughts, like in an OCD, for example, you can have religious content that you're dealing with. Um, on the other hand, probably what you are referring to is what sometimes can also be referred to as the Indian school of thought or Indian, therapies. The origin of the Indian school of therapy is the Bhagavad Gita, and a lot of people attribute the discourse that Lord Shri Krishna had with Arjuna as the basis of Indian psychology and Indian therapeutic forms. And to some extent, when practitioners you want to relate to this cultural background, then they do use quotes from the Bhagavad Gita, and there are other techniques that are Indian and part of the Indian psychology excuse me, that can be used, and to some extent religion does play a role there. I don't know if that is what you're referring to. CBT per se, the pure form, does not allow for any kind of a religious or any other tilt into it. But if you can use eclectic forms, which means you add other forms to the CBT, your basis is CBT, but then you can add other forms of therapy depending on the nature of the problem that the individual is facing. That then deviates away from the typical traditional CBT model. Okay. Anybody else wants to weigh in on this? You're welcome to. Riddhi, Christy, anybody wants to add anything to this?
I think you covered it now.
Yes, ma'am. I was also thinking on those lines because the eclectic approach is what we usually go for, and we, inculcate those things into therapy rather than the whole religious CBT is not something that I think I've also heard of. Anybody else has any question? Please feel free to drop it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
If there are no other questions, shall we wrap up?
Yes, sure, ma'am. I'll then conclude. Thank you so much, Riddhi, for taking the time out and breaking down the complex concepts of CBT into more practical and, relatable insights, and making this learning experience more easy and accessible to people. And as I conclude, I hope you're all leaving with a simple takeaway that our thoughts are not really fixed, and with awareness and practice, they can be reshaped. And the principles of CBT offer those practical tools to respond to these challenges with greater clarity and balance is what we have learned from this. And small shifts in thinking can create meaningful changes in our emotions and then our behavior as well. So thank you for being a part of this conversation and taking a step towards understanding CBT better. And whoever joined us for the first time, just to let you all know, we have these webinars every month, end of the month, last Friday of the month. We always meet at 7 o'clock. So we're looking forward to seeing you again next month on the last Friday of March. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today.